right, so now we have photosynthesis part 2, and this is going to be just about the light reaction. And so we are inside of our chloroplast, and the light reaction is going to take place inside this little stack we have here. Okay, so this little stack we have here is called the thylakoid. It is full of the pigment, okay, and pigment absorbs light. And we are talking about chlorophyll. And there's actually two types of chlorophyll. We have chlorophyll A and we have chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll A is your main pigment, and chlorophyll B is called an accessory pigment, okay? Because if you have a daylight where there's a lot of light, the main pigment kind of maxes out on how much light it can absorb. So your accessory pigment, chlorophyll B, can actually step in and absorb that excess light so that photosynthesis has an overabundance of light energy to run their whole process, okay? So light reaction is happening here, and this is why this is going to be green, okay? And then the next video is going to be about the dark reaction. The dark reaction is going to happen in this fluid that surrounds these thylakoids, okay? All right, so let's focus specifically on our thylakoid. And each one of these little membrane packages is called a grana, okay? And so inside of here, we have our little sunshine over here, and you can use a light source of any kind, okay? So we'll just call it light. So you don't have to grow plants outside. They can grow inside, but they must have light. Now light that we see, we call it white light. And white light actually has all the colors of the rainbow. So it's got red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And all of those colors are seen as white light. So actually the plant is being exposed to every single color. But the color that we actually see, most plants, and we'll talk about a typical plant, is green. And the reason things appear, the color that they appear, so for example, if I have an apple, okay? And we'll talk about a red apple, okay? The color, so here's your little face, and here's your eyeball. There's your nose, your mouth, your ear. Okay, so you are seeing the apple, and the reason you are seeing the apple as red is because red is the color that is being reflected. Okay, so it's bouncing back into your eye. So the apple is absorbing the orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, but it is appearing red to you because that is what's being reflected back into your eye. So a white t-shirt versus a black t-shirt, so this t-shirt will be black. Okay. They appear to be the colors that they are, so red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, because of what they reflect. So white actually reflects all colors, and they bounce off of the white t-shirt. And that's why a white t-shirt doesn't feel quite as hot, because it's actually reflecting those colors, and when you see it as white, you're seeing all the colors come back to you. It's kind of a weird concept, but that's what's true. Black absorbs all these colors. So when you are wearing something dark and it's very bright outside, it gets hotter because it's absorbing all that light, and light carries with it heat. So on a leaf, okay, most people would assume that plants love the color green. But based on the concept of color, Roy G. Biv, the actual leaf, which is where photosynthesis occurs, is green because it rejects green, okay? So it absorbs all of these other colors, okay? So green is its least favorite color. So when we talk about photosynthesis, a plant's favorite color is red. Its second favorite color is blue. So inside this chloroplast, okay, we're going to do our sun, or our light source, L-I-G-H-T, okay, and it is, we're going to draw a blue arrow of light, and we are going to draw a red arrow of light, because plants actually prefer red and blue. So if you're growing a plant inside, lots of times people use something called a black light. I don't know why, because it's actually purple. And purple is the color you get when you mix the red and the blue. And then the green is actually the color that's being reflected. So some plants actually have leaves. There's a couple plants that have purple leaves and different things like that. And the reason their leaves are purple is because they've evolved and adapted to actually absorb that other color of green that's reflected by all the plants around it. And so they absorb that color and they reject the purple and the red, and so they give their purple and red to the plants near them, and then they take the green from the other plants. So, but most plants have evolved to use this red and blue light and prefer that, okay? So there's your light. If you don't have light, none of this happens. So every piece of the puzzle is important. So the light reaction has to have light, okay? Doesn't matter if it's natural or man-made. Light is important. The second thing is that it needs H2O, which is water. And that water is going to come up from the roots, up against gravity, using, so it comes from the roots, it uses adhesion and cohesion, the adhesive and cohesive properties. Water molecules stick to each other, they stick to the side of the tubes, they climb up against the plant, and they climb into the leaf. Okay, if you don't water your plant, but you give it plenty of light, nothing's going to happen. Okay, so every piece of the puzzle is super important. So light and water go into this thylakoid, and from going into the thylakoid, they're going to make a product. They're going to make actually two things, okay? So two things are going to happen. So when you look at a water molecule is one oxygen with two hydrogens combined. I want you to remember this, and this is super important. Hydrogen is important. Okay, this is what the plant is trying to get, okay? This is what it wants. It wants the hydrogen. But the hydrogen is bonded, annoyingly, to an oxygen. So, the concept is do something to break it apart. Because if you can break apart these hydrogens, then you can get what you need. This is the fuel, okay? So the fuel that the plant wants is the hydrogen. So in the light reaction, the water comes into the thylakoid, and with lots and lots of steps, we're not going to get too specific, but with lots of work, it can take this water molecule, it breaks the H2O apart. Okay, so that's the first thing it does. It keeps, the hydrogen, and we'll call it H+, and it gets rid of the O2, or the oxygen. Doesn't need it, okay? So when it breaks it apart, all this hydrogen stays, okay? So it stays in the thylakoid. And guess who gets kicked out? Oxygen. Okay, so all that oxygen that you're breathing in actually was once attached to a water molecule. All right, so all the water molecules are necessary because the plant doesn't want oxygen. It wants to keep the hydrogen because in a minute it's going to get the oxygen that it needs to make its final product of C6H12O6. Okay, so this H12, that ingredient, is where that's coming from the hydrogen that it rips apart from the water. So the water molecules get all ripped apart in the light reaction, and they keep the hydrogen and they get rid of the oxygen. Okay, so there's where that sugar that you eat, that hydrogen came from water, and that oxygen that you breathe, that oxygen came from water. Okay, so we're going to look a little bit closer at what happens in that thylakoid as the hydrogen levels build up. So, get your thylakoid. All right, so the whole time that this plant has light and it has water, it's going to keep breaking apart these water molecules. All right, just break them. And there's two steps that it goes through. And this is going to be so weird, but I swear this is the truth. Photosystem 2 happens first, and then photosystem 1 happens second. Okay? So photosystem 2 is where you rip the H2O apart. Okay? And then photosystem 1 is where we're going to transfer the H, okay? And I'm going to talk about what that transfer of H means, okay? But photosystem 2 happens first. Don't know why they named it photosystem 2, but it happens first, and it's where the water's ripped apart. Okay, keep the hydrogen, get rid of the oxygen. And they call this an atmospheric byproduct. And byproduct means I did not mean to make it. It's a product, but it's just a waste product, okay? So now, the second step where the sugar gets made is called your Calvin cycle, or your dark reaction, or your light independent reaction. In order for it to run, it has to have energy. And energy in the cell and in all organisms is ATP, okay? So ATP is the energy source to run the Calvin cycle. It comes from the light reaction. Okay, so if the light reaction does not occur, you do not have energy, and if you do not have energy, Calvin cycle cannot occur. So ATP is our energy, so we're going to make it real energetic. Okay, now the way it gets energized is in photosystem 1. So photosystem 1 creates that energized ATP, and I'm going to show you in a second how that happens. But this would be like a full tank of gas. Okay, so when your car is full, you can drive a long, long way, but as you drive, you use up that gas. So as the Calvin cycle runs and happens, it's going to use up that ATP. When ATP, its energy gets used up, it becomes something called ADP, okay? And ADP is an empty tank, or almost empty, okay? So we're getting really close. So we got to head back over here to our gas station to refill. So ADP is the molecule that returns back to the light reaction to get re-energized by photosystem 1 and turn back into ATP. And then it can go back over here to the dark side and fuel the reaction. So full tank of gas, full of energy, does its job, drives round and round and round, runs this cycle, and then when it gets really low, it becomes ADP, and it goes back to get energized. Now, ATP, ADP, okay, so ATP is a molecule, and it stands for adenosine triphosphate. Okay, and triphosphate, tri means 3. So it's an adenosine molecule that has 3 phosphates. So adenosine kind of looks like this. So there's your adenine, okay, with some ribose. And then it has 1 phosphate, 2 phosphates, and 3 phosphates. So it's very similar to a molecule found in DNA. All right, so this is full of energy. 1, 2, 3, triphosphate. And then when it starts getting low, what happens is this bond gets broken. So when it's used energy, you have to break the bond. So then all of a sudden ATP becomes ADP. All right, so it still has the adenine and the ribose, but now it has only 1, 2 phosphates. Okay, so ADP, this stands for adenosine diphosphate. And di is a prefix that means 2. Okay, so ATP is a full energy molecule. ADP is heading towards empty. We're talking about energy. So in order to re-energize ADP, you add another phosphate group. In order to use the energy, you break that phosphate off. There is this third molecule, and y'all have heard about it in cell signaling, and it is called AMP. So TP is 3 phosphates, DP is 2 phosphates, and AMP is 1 phosphate. So he has the least amount of energy. So it's adenosine, a ribose, but he only has 1 phosphate. Okay, so ATP, ADP, and AMP. There's this other little molecule you've heard about in cell signaling, just to kind of put you on there. There's GTP. It looks just like ATP except for adenine. It has guanine. And then there's a GDP, same deal. It loses some of its energy. And there's GMP every now and then. So instead of adenine, it just has guanine. So ATP, GTP, very, very similar molecules, just different bases. Okay? So back to the light reaction. ATP, energy molecule full, heading over here to run the Calvin cycle, and when it gets empty, it comes back as ADP, and photosystem 1 will transfer the hydrogen and turn ADP into ATP. So gives energy. Very important step. Okay, so photosystem 2 splits the water to keep the hydrogen. Photosystem 1 re-energizes ADP into ATP so that it can run the system. And then there's this new molecule. It has a very strange name, but you don't really need to know what all the letters stand for. But it is called NADPH. Okay? And it's all capitals. And NADPH, his job, okay? NADPH hydrogen to the Calvin cycle, or to the dark side, okay? So he is going to carry hydrogen all day long, okay? So he carries it, dumps it off, carries it, dumps it off, carries it, and dumps it off. Now, when he dumps it off, this should be a very simple concept for you because the H now gets dumped off. He is not NADPH, he is just now NADP, okay? So he goes to the dark side as NADPH, drops off the H, comes back as NADP. Photosystem 1 will give him a hydrogen, and then he'll keep going back over and over and over and over, okay? So NADPH is called a carrier molecule because he carries hydrogen, and he's carrying hydrogen nonstop all day long, okay? So this hydrogen is kind of cool because we know that as concentrations build up, and if you were to look inside that chloroplast and inside that thylakoid, after there's a lot of photosystem 2 going on and a high buildup of hydrogen, inside is high concentration of hydrogen. Outside is low concentration of hydrogen. What do things naturally do when they're really crowded and they're highly concentrated? Which way do they like to flow? They go from high to low. So they're going to naturally diffuse out. And the thing about hydrogen is it's super energized. Like, it's so full of energy. So when it does that, it flows out it creates these little sparks of energy, and ATP gets created here. So when it diffuses out, so this is ATP is created when the high energy hyper hydrogen diffuses out. So if you don't build up enough hydrogen, it won't diffuse out. If it doesn't diffuse out, you don't get ATP. And if you don't get ATP, you don't get to do the Calvin cycle. And if you don't get to do the Calvin cycle, you don't make sugar. And if you don't make sugar, the plant dies. So all components are completely important in order for this light reaction to happen, to make the dark reaction happen, to make the actual food. So in the end, your light reaction, water plus light, and we're going to specifically say blue and red, or their favorite colors, are going to make oxygen as a byproduct. They don't really care about that. They're just getting rid of it. So there's a waste product. Plus hydrogen, okay, plus ATP, okay? So they're going to make all of this, and these two things are going to go to the Calvin cycle. And then this is going to leave through the leaves. It's going to go out the stomata. So the more photosynthesis the plant does, the more the more oxygen leaves. So sometimes you go high up on mountains and your air is really thin, and what that means is low levels of oxygen because there's not a lot of plants up there doing a lot of photosynthesis. Plus, oxygen's a little bit heavier and it likes to sink. So you got to carry oxygen tanks with you lots of times when you go on really high mountains. All right, so that is your light reaction. And that is going to be the fuel that runs and helps us get to the dark reaction so that we can make our food and our plants don't starve.